Okay, so I think now it's time for us to move to the first panel. So Juan Pablo Freijo will join us and William Restrepo as well. Well, so let's move to our first panel and hopefully, and we will try to address these subjects that I just mentioned in my opening remarks with very capable people that actually are in the matter. So Juan Pablo Freijo, he's an industrial engineer. He knows business. He studied business later on. He actually combines both aspects, both backgrounds, the technical part and the business part. He has an outstanding career, really, that has gone through many different things, from starting oil companies and then growing them, and now he's switching to something else, a very active person. So the very first question that I like to do to open this, Juan Pablo, is actually tell us a little bit about your own story, perhaps a little bit from the beginning at CGC, and eventually pivoting later on to Sempen. Don't talk too much about Sempen yet, because I think there will be more subject about it, but a little bit of your own story, because I think that actually describes the entrepreneurship, the speed at which things in energy can actually happen. So, go ahead.
Of course. Can you hear me correctly? So I like a lot the theme that you brought to the table in your opening remarks about risk. I think we'll come back to that many times during this conversation. And my career, in fact, was marked especially by probably taking the choice of risk in every fork in the way. I'm an engineer. I started working in investment banking during the first years, which doesn't seem like the risky choice. But instead of going to the large investment banks, I went to a small boutique where I felt that I could have more impact and learn a little bit more than in the large firms with a more, I don't know, the more determined career path. But let's concentrate in energy. In 2010, I had an opportunity in front of me, which was Corporación América, a large holding in Argentina, decided that they wanted to get into the oil and gas business, into the energy space from scratch. And they called me and told me, do you want to join and start this? And I said yes. I was 27 probably at the time, or 26. And starting a new energy company from scratch at that age was something to be very, very afraid of. And I did it. So we started with nothing. We were a team of 3 people, if I don't remember wrong. As with every startup, at the beginning we made a lot of mistakes. I always say that my real master's, I studied a lot, so I have business experience, engineering experience, and also studied in several things during my career, but I say that my real master's in life was the $12 million that we sunk in our first project in oil and gas that never saw the light again. And that was a lot of learning. Fortunately, the people that were behind this understood that the oil and gas business is really risky and that with $12 million you don't do anything. So we kept on investing and growing. The first big step we did was acquiring a company called CGC. That was 2013. I would say that when we acquired that, we were very convinced about the potential that we saw in the assets CGC had. A lot of gas in Argentina at a moment when gas was being paid probably 1.2 or 1.3 to the local producers, at least in where we were. While we were importing gas at $17 LNG, so there was a huge arbitrage there and an opportunity, and we saw that. So we acquired that company, which had a very difficult situation in terms of how it was in shape. It had went through 10 years of bad financial situations, and it had as a partner and operator a very big company called Petrobras, who at the time decided that they didn't want to be in Argentina any longer. So that was the other challenge. Long story short, 2 years later, we could acquire Petrobras participation there and became operators and started growing. A well drilled by Petrobras cost $4.5 million. After we started changing the whole teams, the drilling rig, I think you'll speak a little bit more about drilling rigs. That same well cost less than half, $1.8 million.
You need to recover the first $12 million, right?
Yeah, we did.
Very quickly, yeah?
I always say we did repay the investment and a lot more. And with that, we started a very huge and successful story of growth, not without risks. We started drilling in the Austral Basin where no other operators were drilling. We were very alone there. And after that, we tripled production of gas, started putting the company into shape, and we decided that we wanted a little bit more of risk because we were like hungry for more growth, and we saw that gas had certain patterns that could be offset, at least partly, with oil. We were mostly a gas production company, so we decided that we wanted to get also into the oil part of the business, and we started looking for opportunities there. Something that took a lot of time. I would say the decision was made in 2017, and finally we acquired a very important asset called Sinopec. It was the Chinese company leaving Argentina. That happened 4 years later in 2021. And with that, we doubled the CGC. So point to point, from losing $12 million and investing a lot of money, in the end, we built from scratch a company that now has revenues of $800 million and a EBITDA of almost $400 million and 50,000 of barrels of oil equivalent per day of production. So quite a story.
Fantastic. It definitely is quite a story, and it illustrates quite a bit of what we just mentioned. I think it's a great example for people to see how that perseverance is critical. But at the end of the day, in the energy, things turn out to be correct most of the time. So I'm not going to let you talk a lot about Sempen now, but just tell me just a few words. We'll leave it open for the next question later on, because you're actually switching now. So just tell me a little bit of the switch of your career, so people know that you have after all that you changed.
Yes, I believe that. Thanks. I believe that in the end, all my choices were in the same direction. You know, when I started working in this small boutique firm, when we started CGC, in the middle I didn't tell this part of the story, but in 2015 I went to live in the US to study there, and while I was studying there, I also built a company. We were a startup. We started with an Argentinian business partner from scratch. We built a company doing delivery of fuel in 4 cities in California, which we sold after returning to Argentina, to that story that I ended up telling you. So I think that I have this chip or DNA of trying to build things.
There you go.
And now, after CGC became more of a corporation and we're a more stable company, I decided, after researching and getting into the energy transition space for the past 4 years, that I wanted to dedicate my life fully to that.
Okay, we'll
so
talk
I
about
left CGC and now I'm building.
We'll talk about your second or maybe third life, apparently, in the way I counted 3. So thank you very much, Juan Pablo. Okay, so the title of our panel is about leading enterprises and the role that they actually play in the development of technology and in the energy world, because it's a fundamental role, the leading enterprises. And that's a story, of course, as CGC and a leading oil and gas company in Argentina with a full successful story, as it was just told. And William also, of course, he comes from the corporation world. He also has this mixed background, this breed, that he's an engineer by background. He studied at the Cornell. Later on, I mean, he moved into business. I guess he wanted to do business, and with his technological background as well. And he has worked for renowned corporations, as I'm sure you know. And today, he's running the financial part for one of the largest rig companies, Nabors Industries. So William, tell us a little bit about your story. We're not going to go all the way to the very beginning, but we really want to know the piece about the role of the corporations, because you've seen that from your time at Schlumberger, I mean, leading with technology and some of the changes, and later on the same thing with other companies, and you're living today the change and the role that leading corporations are willing and trying to play very hard. So tell us a little bit about that.
I think you hit all the major points, and
No, not really. You should know that the best thing comes last, William. Eh?
So I did spend 20 years in Schlumberger, and I think that marked me because I spent many years trying to develop new technologies, selling these technologies to clients, convincing them that this was the right technology for them, and internally trying to get that technology from the product centers to places like Argentina, for instance, or the Middle East. And I think one of the most critical things that I learned from Schlumberger is, number one, that technology really gives you a huge edge, and innovation is really the food for technology, and Schlumberger knew how to do that very well. And I think the second thing that I learned is that developing new technologies is very expensive, right? You mentioned $12 million. I can't believe, really, I mean, we sank billions of dollars in Schlumberger in stuff that never.
There are people here waiting.
But things that never saw the light of day. But then, you know, a significant percentage of those did see the light of day and created the company that Schlumberger is today. So that's a critical lesson, that you're going to get it wrong many times as you invest, but you just can't invest on one thing. You have to maybe try again, and you're going to fail, and you have to get up and do something different, because, you know, nothing is guaranteed, as Mariano says. So those 20 years for me were very important. I also realized that a lot of my strength was identifying technologies, identifying interesting investment opportunities, technologies that were going to be important in the future, not today, and then finding ways to finance and convince the board of directors or the CEO that we needed to invest in certain things rather than others. So I switched a little bit to the CFO role. We did spend with Mariano some great times in Milan selling technology to Agip, and I enjoyed my operational roles. But I think my real strengths were more in the financial side. So since I left Schlumberger, I've been in several companies as their CFO. One was Sempen International, another one called Pacific Drilling, and today in Nabors. So that's my whole career has been in the energy sector. And I view energy as a much more global thing than just oil and gas or renewables. I think everything works together, and everything affects each other, right? I mean, the cost of oil and gas affects the speed at which renewables can be implemented. You know, some technologies work hand in hand together. So all of that is how we view it at Nabors today. So we're not really an oil and gas company anymore. Hydrocarbons is very important, of course, but we are investing in renewables today. And I'm not going to talk about that so much today, right now, because you're going to ask me some questions. But one of the things that I'm very happy and proud and privileged is that within Nabors, I was given the responsibility to invest in new technologies. And up to date, we have spent about, I would say, $100 million in the last year plus. To give you an idea of the magnitude of that, our total capital expenditures for the hydrocarbon side is going to be about $420 million this year. So $100 million in new energies is quite material. With that,
yeah, tremendous for sure. Yeah, and it really shows how corporations, what the role of corporations really is, and how important that is. And that number that you gave, you didn't put it. You didn't tell us the scale of the overall investment of R&D within Nabors, but I know that is a pretty large, substantial percentage of the overall investment in R&D from Nabors itself.
Right. I mean, this was just investing in companies. So I'm not talking about what we are investing every year in things like R&D, but today we probably, I would say, $60–70 million overall in Nabors in R&D, and probably about 10 million of that, maybe even 15. Usually when you plan for those investments, it's going to be more, right? So it's about $15 million in transitional types of technologies, right? So, and that doesn't count the investment that the companies we've invested in, which we don't manage directly, are investing in technology today. So,
Correct.
so I think we're having, we're putting quite a few chips in different technologies, and we're not sure today. We've invested in 7 companies. We're not sure of those 7 companies which are going to be fantastically successful, which are going to be dogs. So that's something that we're monitoring today and watching very carefully. But the fact is that we think of those 7 companies, probably 3 or 4 are going to be really nice success stories, and others we'll have to help them along. So that is a little bit the trajectory of Nabors in joining this exciting field, because it's a fantastic opportunity. I think, as Mariano said, I think one of the most powerful forces in society today is the climate movement. It is almost a passion for many people. People feel very strongly about it. Its emotions are incredibly high when you talk to people about changing the world and making a difference. So this is here to stay. And people in the hydrocarbons world that don't realize this, and some people, believe me, still don't realize this, are really going to be the dinosaurs. And so it's only the companies. I do think, Mariano, though, that a lot of the change and innovation is going to come by funding from the energy companies, maybe not directly within the envelope of the energy company, because big companies tend to be very bad at taking something small and trying to make it good, right? I mean, I don't know how many companies we bought in Schlumberger and we destroyed their technologies by not having a clue on how to run something from that level, from startup to something commercial, right? Or something profitable. So a lot of investment within the Baker Hughes and the Schlumbergers and Halliburtons, I don't think it's going to be as successful as maybe supporting companies, supporting entrepreneurs, talented people, as Mariano said, people that really are living every single minute of the day, dreaming about the companies and working on their dreams. That is how we change the world.
Clearly, yeah. Well said. Very well put, William. So let me now, with those 2 stories that really illustrate the role of the enterprises, let me ask a question now, because it's the subject, of course, of new energy and climate. So, and you're a good example of something very new that you're working on, which is on sustainable aviation fuels. So tell us, in a nutshell, a little bit about that. I mean, why are you doing it that way? Why is that one going to succeed? And how are you going to recover your $12 million?
Those were recovered, don't worry. Luckily, more than recovered. So I completely agree with what you described first. I think we are before a historic moment. The changes we are seeing in the energy markets are those that happens once every century. So it's like we saw the 19th century with massive adoption of coal, the 20th century with massive adoption of oil and gas, and now we're starting to see this century with adoption in every country in the world of renewables. So that is a change that is here to stay. And those changes, at least in my head, I divide them into groups. The easy ones or low-hanging fruit are those that will happen whatever we do, which are saving energy in all of its forms, because we're completely aligned to do that. It's an incentive that we all share, changing light bulbs to LED, saving energy, and all those kind of stuff. The second one for me is electrification. We are seeing a lot of things being electrified, from industry to transportation. Even in China, that is probably the most polluting country in the world. Last year, the penetration of electric vehicles was 20%. So it's happening faster than what everyone thought. Even the oil companies that you mentioned that don't realize the change, well, yes, it's happening. And the third one for me, it's the hard-to-abate sectors. And that is where I'm focusing. The hard part, because I think that if we really don't put money, effort, and mind into that, it won't happen. And that is like cement, steel, and long-distance transportation. And long-distance transportation for me is shipping on the one hand, and aviation on the other. Yeah. There are small parts of aviation that you can electrify. Probably if you're going to do a 1 hour or 2 hour flight with 6 passengers, you are seeing these eVTOLs that are these new, like big drones that can transport people. But if you want to take off with an Airbus 380, that weighs 600 tons, 250 tons of that is fuel, and you don't have a battery that can match that energy density.
Exactly.
So
So
there
how-
you
so
need
how
a
you gonna do
solution.
it?
Okay, so what I'm focusing on right now with Sempen is in
Yeah.
producing the fuels that can replace the fuels we are using now. So that is called SAF, which is the acronym for Sustainable Aviation Fuel.
Yeah.
And SAF is a chemical that is exactly identical to the jet fuel we produce from crude oil,
Yeah.
but produced from renewable sources. And there are many ways to produce this. You can produce it from 7 different pathways, using different feedstocks such as vegetable oils, animal fats, bioethanol, algae, and for me, which is the holy grail of this industry, is what is called power to liquids, that is just using sun,
Yeah.
wind, air, and water. And you have unlimited resources to do that and produce these fuels. And you know, this is so chemically identical to the original one, the fossil one, that you can already blend it at 50% in commercial flights. That's already approved by ASTM.
Fantastic.
And it has also been tested at 100%, just to
Fantastic.
prove its compatibility.
I have no doubt that it will work, and I'm pretty sure that it will definitely play a role in that mix. And where are those startups or those first developments are going to happen? In which continent?
I think that they will happen in many places. It's not concentrated in a place, but I believe that Latin America in particular has an advantage to do this. I'm focusing Sempen in this region,
Right.
and that is because we have huge availability, sustainable availability of the feedstocks required to do this.
Correct.
We have amazing renewable resources to produce energy. We have biogenic resources of CO2 and whatnot.
Correct. And it's a long way as well. I guess we need a lot of fuel to transport as well.
A lot.
Yeah.
And it's growing.
It's growing very well. Okay, thank you. So that brings Latin America. That's where that investment is happening. So William, a similar question to you. Out of those investments that you're doing, I mean, can you describe a little bit of those companies? I mean, briefly.
Sure.
Why you selected those and what was the criteria? Was it that they match your own strategy, that they are different to your own strategy, that they complement it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mariano. I think one of the keys to investing well is investing with discipline. And that means investing for a reason, for a strategy in our case. I think one of the things that's fantastic about Nabors is that our board of directors and our CEO decided to pursue this strategy. It's not something that management decided, it's the whole company decided. So we have the full support of the board. So the strategy was, first, we do think that hydrocarbons are going to be with us for quite some time, even if we electrify the infrastructure, the vehicles. We're still going to be using natural gas and other hydrocarbons for decades. That's a fact. However, we are going to be using them only if we can produce them responsibly, which means with zero emissions. And then if we can somehow couple the consumption of those hydrocarbons with monitoring of emissions, capturing those emissions. Now, I don't know if it'll be competitive with some of the things that are going to be developed, for instance, by this gentleman or hydrogen or whatever, but we know that it is absolutely possible if we electrify the use of energy and then we produce that energy centrally. Certainly natural gas can be a valuable piece of allowing us to get to 2050 with net zero. So we think that, we believe that, so we're going to be continuing with our drilling rigs, but I admit that's not the most exciting part of our business 10 years from now, but it certainly will be a critical piece of delivering the energy pie to the world. So that piece, we are working a lot on fuel management, fuel enhancers, carbon capture, carbon monitoring. So these are areas that allow us to use the resource responsibly. And there's going to be a huge opportunity. We're seeing that today. We invested in a company called Aclima, which is monitoring today emissions for the state of New York and California. So they have a car with a small, about this big, group of sensors that captures what's in the air and sends it up to the cloud. And the state of New York regulators can identify the hot spots and go fix them as real time as quickly as possible. So methane emissions or other, dangerous thing, not only carbon, but also other emissions. So that's a company that I think has huge potential. We're very excited about the prospects of that piece. And that's one of the examples of companies that are basically trying to identify, measure, monitor, and then other companies where we are converting CO2 into a material called graphene. So again, those are technologies that make use of the resources we have today responsibly to help us eventually replace what is a huge amount of resources and supply chain, because it's not just the provision of the energy today. There's a huge supply chain behind it. And as you well know, creating a company, creating that supply chain is going to take us some time. So those are some of the companies that we're investing in are based on making hydrocarbons responsible. But that's not the only thing. I mean, we are expanding beyond our rigs. So we have a production of hydrogen that is green, that we can, with a relatively small module, we can use to make diesel in ships today more, I would say, more friendly. So we take out about 25% of the carbon emissions by using this module. And we're in discussions with shippers and truckers today to bring, a 25% reduction in emissions is nothing to sneeze at. So those are some of the technologies that we're looking at today, but we don't think that's enough. We also want to invest in renewables, so we have invested in geothermal, 4 companies in geothermal, from drilling technologies to systems underground to make geothermal, I would say, feasible anywhere in the world. And some of those are 5-year projects, others are 2-year projects. Again, most of our investment has been in those 4 companies that we invested in geothermal. And then finally, I think we're looking today at things like concentrated solar. So solar photovoltaic is very well covered. That's not a very interesting thing to do. You can't really compete with the Chinese and others. But concentrated solar, which is basically mirrors that take the solar rays and target them onto a metallic target, and then that heat is stored for use overnight. So that's one of the disadvantages of solar today, is that you only can get it when sun is shining. But if you can use concentrated solar together with photovoltaic solar, you have a storage mechanism to continue producing at night when the sun is no longer there. So those are some of the things that we're investing in: renewables, monitoring, reduction of emissions, and efficiency in the oil field.
Outstanding, William, and definitely that was a longer answer than the one I expected, because if you used to ask the same question, perhaps 36 or 48 months ago to a leading drilling company, which by the way has a lot of technology, the answer would have been much more brief and concentrated. And today you can see how that has expanded. So it's really outstanding. Unfortunately, we are hitting the clock and running out of time, because there's a lot more to be said over here. But I just want to ask you a last question to both of you, and really, it's, since your background comes from technology and business, and you are into startups, and what's your message for those people and young guys that have that background, that want to do business with technology? Make it quickly, but give them your own message.
I go?
Go ahead.
First, that I believe that in this space, the E+C, we are seeing this amazing opportunity to build the companies of the future. It's now. We have a window of opportunity, especially as the oil and gas companies are still seeing how to continue drilling and doing that. The other energies are a free space to work, I believe. It's a unique opportunity. Again, once every century, these kind of opportunities emerge, and with a combination of technology and business, you can really go into this. And the other one is to not overestimate the downside risk. We all always have a lot of fear of what would happen if I fail. Well, these are all attempts. We have to build companies. I would say work at a startup, build a startup, and let's do this. And don't listen too much to advice, such as the one as I'm giving now. Just be authentic and build your path. And that is.
Fantastic, well done. And you have a history of doing it well, definitely. Okay, best of luck with Sempen as well. I'm sure you will have it. William?
I think it's a failure game. In general, if you're trying to build your dreams, you're going to fail at the beginning and make mistakes. But I think the important thing is to keep on persisting. Don't get discouraged in terms of trying to push your ideas, and it's obviously, if you're going to be innovating, some of those things won't be great. But again, you need to keep pedaling. I think it's a numbers game. So if you try, say, 3, 4, 5 times, maybe 2 of those will be fantastic, and then a couple others maybe not so much. But I think the investment community today is really throwing money at all these activities that I'm talking about. When I go out there, I'm talking to people like Tesla, Fidelity. All these people are putting money into these because they know, they see the need, and they believe that this is going to be around for a long time. So startups that I would say in other sectors, nobody wants to put money. In the energy sector, they just give you money very easily. And they realize that it's going to be a rocky road. But I think if you really want to be in a sector that is transformative, this is going to be one of them, for sure, absolutely sure. So anyway, if you want to invest and grow and create something, this is one of the best fields. And certainly Latin America, I'm very excited about your ideas, because I think Latin America is not yet well-traveled, and there's a lot of opportunities. The U.S. is getting a little bit crowded in some areas, but here in Latin America is virgin territory, so it's going to be fantastic opportunities here.
That's a great place to end that. I think we have time for one question at least, perhaps, because we promised we will do, and I want to take at least one if there is. Otherwise, we move on. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you both coming here today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mariano.
Thank you.